Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to Just Thinking. Today we will be talking about an existing Massachusetts law that was put into place in 2016 to protect the rights of transgender people. There are some among us who want to overturn that law. That's what question 3 is about on the November ballot. I have never really given any thought to this law. It was one of those obvious things to me. Of course, transgender people should have the same rights as other people. The common denominator is people. We're all people. That's it. Cut and dried. But there is always someone that wants to use scare tactics to suggest that a group of people is threatening to us. Fear-mongering is an old tactic, a very effective tactic, because fear is an instinct. Thinking is not an instinct. When we feel fear, our flight or fight mechanism triggers. Unfortunately, it takes our deliberate effort to think, discuss, evaluate, and consider. Those who want us to vote no, and thereby repeal the law, talk about risks to women and children, the vulnerable populations, I presume, in bathrooms and gym showers. Risks from men who are pretending to be women just so they can invade these spaces. The key word there is pretend. Do you know someone that was born with some physical, medical, or mental challenge? Do you know an autistic? Do you know someone who's dyslexic? Do you think they're pretending? Our bodies are comprised of about 37 trillion cells. It is a wonder to me that we function as well as we do, given how many opportunities there are for variations. There are big variations and little ones. There are visible variations and hidden ones, and there are variations in all of us. Here's where the idealist in me comes out. I like the thinking of Native Americans. They must have been idealists too. They believe we are all connected to one another and to every other living thing in nature. That makes us one great big colorful quilt. You can rip out patches here and there and survive, but that quilt will never be as strong, as beautiful, or as useful as it was when it was fully intact. Among the patches of our beautiful quilt are people that the world has labeled transgenders. I wish we didn't have to label everybody on Earth. Transgenders have their own journey that only they can describe. Today we are talking about transgender rights with State Representative Carolyn Dykema and 2 openly transgender people and busy advocates. We have Holliston High School's band director, Sean Bilodeau, and a prominent Boston attorney, who I've just discovered also lives here, Sara Schnorr. We are live on Facebook, and I'm going to stop here to say if you want to send a comment, be sure that you send it on the Facebook page that belongs to HCAT, Holliston Cable Access, or on I'm Holliston Happy, because those are the 2 places that we will then be able to see them. If you do have a comment, just type it in and we will try to address it. So let's introduce our guests formally and then let's get started. Okay, Carolyn Dykema, back again. Carolyn comes and visits occasionally. Thank you.
Glad to be here, Mary.
Okay, and Sean, welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to meet you.
Really excited to be here.
Thanks. And now that I know that you live here in town, hi, Sara. Sara has an interest in affordable housing and a long career in it, so that's a pet passion. Anyway, okay, folks, I want to start. I'm hoping I'm going to start at a logical place, and that is to say, not how did we get here? That's too big a question. It's your journey started at some point in your life and brings you to this moment in time facing this issue or perhaps this issue for all of those years. How did you start your journey? Where did the journey begin? Either one of you can go first.
I was, from my earliest memory, I just knew I was male. I would be in the grocery store with my mom, and she tells me I would tell people my name was John. It's just something inherent that I knew. I didn't act on it. I came out as gay at the time when I was in middle school. I knew about that time that people could be transgender, and I kind of knew that was me, but it's really, really scary. I mean, being that age is just scary in general.
Yes.
But, you know, having your body suddenly betray you and not be what's on the inside is gut-wrenchingly awful. So I went through high school and into college, came out fully as gay, and still in the back of my mind, it was always there, and, you know, you should do something about it, you should do something about it. And finally, 3 years ago, I saw the interview with Caitlyn Jenner, and the thing that really got me, I have other issues with some of her other stances, but the thing that got me was her saying she didn't want to be on her deathbed and be like, you just blew your whole life. And I was just like, that's it, I can't do this. I was scared to lose my job. I was scared. I know I'd already come out once to my family, and that was fine, but like,
how
great,
much are they going to take?
I have to do this again. And I'm married. At the time, my wife was just becoming pregnant with our son, and I just knew I couldn't do it anymore. I wanted our son to know me as his dad, and I just said, well, what's going to happen is going to happen. I just need to do this.
That's profiling courage. We'll call that right there. Yeah. How about you, Sara?
So, like Sean, since at age 3, my parents asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I said, Dale Evans cowgirl skirt. They looked at me and they said, little boys don't wear skirts. So since I was 3, I always, when I was little, getting together with my cousins, big Irish Catholic family, even though my name is Schnorr.
Okay.
The other side is McShane.
Okay.
I would always wanted to play dress up with my cousins, wanted to swap clothes, like to put makeup on when I'd go visit family friends, and I would always get yelled at, being a good Catholic little boy. When I was in about 8th grade, I remember being tossed out of the confessional by a priest who refused to give me absolution until I stopped committing the sin of wearing the clothes of an opposite sex. So by the time I was 13, everybody was against me. My uncles, my aunts, my parents, my church. So I just decided to knuckle down and be the best guy I could be, although you can't see with me sitting here, but I'm like, now, I used to be 5'3", now I'm about 5'1". It happens when as you age.
Yes, it does.
So I joined the wrestling team. I went on, became an Eagle Scout. In college, I decided eventually, I taught high school, then I went to law school, became a partner in a big, huge Boston law firm. Married, have 2 kids who are now 25 and 30. And was trying to be the best dad that I could be, but this nagging sense of incongruity in my life never went away. I saw multiple therapists earlier in my 20s and 30s, and even in my 40s. The first couple of therapists I saw, I wanted them to cure me of this thing that was driving me insane.
You wanted them to change what you were thinking.
And feeling.
And feeling.
It ultimately didn't work. So finally, in around 2007 or 2008, I was having a really hard time. I was drinking too much. I was working long hours. I just knew something was wrong. I was using then every chance I could when my family wasn't there to cross-dress in the quiet safety of my house. I would never go out. I was too ashamed. Couldn't go out dressed as a woman. Everybody would laugh at me because that's what I was told. So I finally started working with a therapist in 2008. I was introduced to a number of other transgender people. I suddenly found that our stories were very similar. So beginning in probably January of 2009, I was pretty sure that I knew that I was transgender, and I was pretty sure that the only way I was going to stop drinking and be happy in life was to transition. So that's when I began to take the steps in terms of therapy, voice therapy, letting my hair grow longer, electrolysis, cross-hormone therapy. I came out to my law firm and my extended Irish Catholic family in July of 2009. Nobody, at that point, people were actually very good about it. I was quite surprised at the acceptance I got. So by December 1st of that year, I was practicing law as Sara instead of Tom, which I've been doing ever since. I'm happier, I'm healthier, my blood pressure is lower. And even though my wife and I are separated, we both live in Holliston, about 3 miles apart. We get together 5 times a week. I have a better, more open, honest, and more emotionally satisfying relationship with both of my kids and my wife than I ever had before I transitioned.
Do you suppose that's because you can finally just be real?
Yes. I have nothing to hide.
Isn't that true for just about everybody? That if you're not being real, no matter what the issue is, you're not going to have connections.
That's what I tell my students.
Yep.
I couldn't tell them to do that for themselves if I was being a hypocrite and not doing it.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I have a granddaughter who's is in the middle school, but you are legendary in the schools, and absolutely everybody apparently adores you. So.
That's nice
If
to hear.
you seriously, come on, middle schoolers, if you can convince a bunch of middle schoolers that you're an okay person, an okay guy, as far as I'm concerned, that is quite a giant accomplishment. So in whatever enables you to do that, speaking on behalf of my granddaughter anyway, I'm grateful. Carolyn, where do you enter into this legislation that's landed on your desk? Did you know these folks or any other folks before you got into this as a legislative issue? Cross it in your family, personal, anything?
You know, I think everyone has their journey, and we've heard two incredibly courageous stories of transgender people who have found their way. And I have to say, you know, part of this as a legislator has also been my own journey, because when I was elected from Holliston and the other communities and came into the legislature, I had never met a transgender person. I didn't even know what it meant to be transgender. Mm-hmm. And my first exposure was I had a constituent who came into my office one day completely unannounced, just walked into the suite, asked to talk to me, and was obviously very, very emotional. And I sat down and talked with her, and it turns out she still has a transgender brother at the time, and she was conveying to me that she was fearful all the time that something was going to happen to her brother out, you know, in the community. Something, you know, someone was going to get upset, he was going to be hurt, and it was very upsetting for her. And someone had filed a bill, I believe it was Carl Shortino, who is very involved in the Yes on 3 campaign now to protect the bill. And so that sort of prompted my, my education on the issue. And I went and I looked at the bill. I spent a very long time. Carl will tell you that he spent a long time with me. And I want to give credit to the transgender community for being very visible at the State House. And I think one of the reasons why I was so glad to participate in this is when you meet someone who's transgender, it really changes the whole nature of the conversation. You know, it's just, it really reflects back to what you said. You know, of course, we all deserve the same basic rights. We all deserve the same basic freedom and dignity, and certainly the same basic protections under the law. And that's really what this is all about. And, you know, to make sure that the rights that most of us have enjoyed when it comes to public accommodations, whether it be, you know, going into a restaurant or going shopping or going about our business every day, that we will not be subject to discrimination. And if transgender people are, the law will stand behind them and say that that is not something that we support as a society. In fact, you know, it's not right. It's certainly not part of our history here in Massachusetts. And, you know, I've lived in Massachusetts virtually all my life, and I will say that one of the things that I am most proud of being a Massachusetts resident is our history in this Commonwealth of always being on the right side of rights. And we're certainly not perfect. And if you look back at our history, you know, we've had many groups, including women, who have not been granted equal rights under the law, and they've had to be earned and fought for over time. But that being said, we're always headed toward expanding rights and never rolling rights back. And that's why this question number 3, to me, I agree with you. It is absolutely a no-brainer. Yeah. We passed this overwhelmingly in 2016. The Public Accommodations Bill, and it deserves to be ratified essentially with a strong yes on 3 vote on the ballot in 2 weeks.
Well, as I tried to explain to you when I started, or we were talking before we went on camera, I generally try to get out what are the yeses, what are the nos, and let's, you know, just talk and blah blah blah. So I decided it would probably be a good idea for me to go educate myself about what's a no vote, what does that mean. And so first and foremost, the no vote actually repeals, right? Correct. So there's a little bit of confusion there because that's sort of the reverse of what you might think. But at any rate, so the no vote is to repeal the law that you put into place in 2016. So I looked at what the opponents were saying. And the first thing in this listing explaining it was that opportunistic men or convicted sex offenders could exploit the 2016 law and pretend to be transgender so they can access women's spaces like locker rooms and restrooms. Is there any research anywhere talking about a high incidence of sex offenders among the transgender population in general? Anybody?
I'm unaware of any research on that specific question, but it plays into the stereotypical myth that opponents of transgender rights have constantly told. Being transgender has nothing to do with my sexuality or Sean's sexuality. It has to do with our gender identity. The Williams Institute, a research arm of UCLA, did a study that recently the results of it were published in the Globe recently, that showed that over the past 2 years, since this law was passed in Massachusetts, there has been no discernible increase in assaults in sex-segregated spaces. In addition, the Yes on 3 campaign has the support of dozens and dozens and dozens of police officials who said that transgender people pretending they're transgender to sneak into a restroom or a locker room to commit assault is not an issue. Boston and Cambridge have had municipal ordinances going back 10 or 15 years. This has not been happening. I was at a press conference a few days ago, maybe a week ago, at the YWCA in Boston, at which Ayanna Pressley was the lead speaker. And all of the speakers at that event were representatives of women's organizations and sexual assault support organizations, and every single recognized women's organization that's there for women's rights. For protection of women's rights have said this law is not an issue. In fact, this law protects transgender women, me, from the possibility of having to go into what I would consider the wrong bathroom and being perhaps assaulted by someone else.
And I think if you look at the statistics, it's overwhelmingly what Sara says, is that, assaults are disproportionately on transgender people. And which is one of the things that we need to address, and one of the reasons this legislation is so important, so that we can reassure transgender people that the law and certainly the legislature and our state are behind their protection and their equal rights.
Well, it's the Police Association and Chiefs Associations are both supportive, and I mean they're
all the major sports teams, major employers in the state. I mean, this is an economic issue as well.
Yeah, and in fact, the No on Question 3 does raise that, and they say that there are no long-term economic consequences. The little blip that happened in North Carolina's economy is now doing fine, despite a contentious fight. But they're not addressing the fact that at the time when they were in their little brouhaha, there were a lot of nationally prominent businesses and events that refused to go to North Carolina, and they may never recover those dollars. So to say that it's not an economic thing, I don't know how strong or otherwise that is.
Just to speak of it's illegal for anybody to assault anybody in the bathroom.
Exactly.
And as a trans person, before they say passing, before I started hormone treatment 3 years ago, going into the bathroom as a trans person when you're not quite, it's frightening. Like, I wouldn't drink water, and my friends are like, why don't you drink a lot of water? I'm used to not drinking water, so I wouldn't have to go to a public bathroom.
Yeah. I just find, oh, never mind, I already said that. So I also decided in the same vein of trying to figure out, okay, we've got police and we've got chiefs associations and we've got major businesses and sports and everything that are supporting a yes vote. So I thought, okay, who's behind the no vote? There is, the only group that I found was the Massachusetts Family Institute. I know nothing about them except what they've written on their website. They are clearly a faith-based organization, and that's absolutely fine. You know, I'm not against any faith-based organization, but that is what they are. And somehow they tried to lump in that Me Too doesn't seem to apply when we interfere with the agenda of the LGBTQ agenda. And that statement kind of made me pause, because when you think about the Me Too movement, we don't limit it to bathrooms. I mean, we're in boardrooms, we're on movie theaters, we're in the doctor's offices, we're on the gyms. I mean, so I'm not sure. And maybe you've bumped into that conversation in your dealings, that maybe you could offer some insight of what they're getting at.
I genuinely, to me, it's clear that very conservative religious groups have very firm, deeply held beliefs that gender is binary, there's a man and a woman is subservient to her husband, and that's the way it's written in what they call their version of the good book, and that's the way it is. So they find anyone who transgresses that very black and white, yin and yang, binary world, they find it as if it's unsettling the life forces of the world, and so they feel compelled to go out and try to stop it.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time here, because in terms of Me Too, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of trans women who are killed every year just because they're trans women.
So Me Too doesn't apply to trans
No, I guess it doesn't. So they're saying that
Interesting point.
It doesn't apply to, and I can tell you, I have friends, I'm a trans woman, I've had men try to do things to me that, you know.
That other women might have had happen to them.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And so we're not immune from the Me Too issues.
Yep, exactly.
They exist in our community as well as they do in any other community.
It would seem to me that it would be a reason not to become a woman. You know, seriously,
Well,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. There are days when it's like, really.
Okay. I just think the commonality is the dignity and respect.
It is.
You know, regardless of who you are, where you are, what you are, we are each deserving of dignity and respect and safety, you know, in our person.
And I just don't know what these messages are that we are sending to children who are trying to figure out what all of this language and static is all about. I also don't think it's helping that, what was it, yesterday, that the New York Times reported that transgender could be defined out of existence. So in other words, now we're going to get into the business of so specifically just defining gender as male, female, that they're even talking about genetic testing as a way to verify what we are.
Totally flawed, because there's plenty of conditions that involve chromosomes without being transgender. So there are plenty of other medical reasons why that does not work.
Well, I guess the one that it speaks to for me is it's just too much a smack back to the 30s and 40s in terms of testing people, you know, physically evaluating whether you are what you say you are. It's just chilling as far as I'm concerned.
If I can comment, I know the organizations and individuals who have helped craft that policy for the vice president.
Okay.
The one that's developed by Roger Severino, who's the Civil Rights Director of the Department of Health and Human Services. He's been very anti-LGBT, anti-transgender for a very long time. But one of the interesting features of their attempt to define sex as governed by your genitalia at birth, and if they don't have that, then they go look at chromosomes. It's very important that from my personal perspective. They talk about it's not your birth certificate, it's what your certificate of live birth was on the day that you were born. So in 46 of the 50 states, it is possible, after appropriate medical transition treatment, certified by a licensed physician, it's possible to amend your birth certificate to change your gender marker. Enactment of this legislative fiat would suddenly undo what the law is currently in 46 states that allows transgender people, intersex people, people with other medical conditions where their gender may have been indeterminate at birth, to have a birth certificate that reflects what their gender is today. And so this would be an attempt to do that. It could have several horrible consequences for transgender people. If you have a passport that says you're female, because that's what your birth certificate says, someone like me, since I was born Catholic, although all of my identity documents now say female, my baptismal certificate doesn't, and my Catholic high school diploma doesn't say I'm female. So if someone wanted to do a little bit of digging, they could find that on the day I was born, I had male genitalia. Someone could revoke my passport. It would be horrible for me. My law firm has offices in London and in Hong Kong. It means I could not continue to practice the practice of law.
Well, worse yet, if you were there and you couldn't get back in.
Couldn't get back in. So there's, and as Sean said, the notion that sex is just male-female, gender binary, black and white, is a wonderful idea, but scientific and social reality proves it's not. That the human species is much more diverse, much more brightly colored, and has a much greater variety than just black and white, male and female.
And for me, it just comes back to the basic, I think you both said you just were finally able to be who you always knew you were. Why would we ever want to keep people from being who they are? And all of this conversation to me just smacks of control. Certain people wanting to have control over how other people behave or who they are or what they do. And I think that's just not democratic. I mean, look at what we are as a country, and we were built on the notion of individuality and people not only being able to be who they are, but we embrace all of the different strengths and diversity. We welcome that as a strength, not as some kind of something that we want to keep from happening. So that's why this whole conversation, frankly, and the whole fact that we are voting on something like basic rights for individuals is very concerning to me.
Yeah,
but on the other side, I think it's a very important opportunity for us here in Massachusetts, and I firmly believe that we are going to overwhelmingly vote to endorse continuing with the legislation that we passed by voting yes on 3, and show the rest of the country, because we are the only state that has had the opportunity to do this, and I'm looking forward to sending a strong message to the folks who are looking at this that you just mentioned, as well as the rest of the country, to say this is really, protecting equal rights is who we are as a country, and it's important.
I think boiling it down to the one sentence of taking away rights is really what the whole focus should be.
It is.
And if I can take your rights away, somebody else can take mine.
Correct.
And if we aren't protective of yours, then nobody's going to be protective of mine. So as far as I'm concerned, all of this kind of stuff, whether it's happening locally, nationally, or otherwise, is just very self-serving. I want your rights protected because I want my rights protected. I want all of us together to agree we all have the same rights, and let's go and do whatever it is we do. But
We just want to be happy with ourselves and share that happiness with our family and our friends and be good members to our communities. I mean, I have a wife and a kid. We just like a normal family. I just want to be happy. And now that I've had the hormones and some surgeries, I am really happy. I hated myself before. Why would people want to purposely push us back into that state?
because there really is a misunderstanding as to that this is what you want, not what you need. It's really quite the other way around. It is what you needed. It may have been what you wanted, but your body was wired in whatever particular way it was wired. It is what it is. You know, when you talk about people, sometimes we look at the animal kingdom as if the animal kingdom has it all figured out and everybody stays neatly in their lanes about, you know, these breeds don't breed with those breeds, or, you know, like lions and tigers and, you know, that kind of thing. It's all garbage when you go back and you really investigate whether or not there are intermarriages among those, you know, wild beasts, or whether there's any homosexuality among animals. And yes, indeed, there is. And we, as you know, as people, I think we try to find places to hide our fear. It's all about the fear. And as soon as that fear goes off, somebody, you know, has to respond. Why? I don't know why you can't just sit there and say, you know, it's kind of the Om moment, you know, just hold it. Just hold it. What are you really, really afraid of? If you're saying you've got a few sex offenders that are running around, I don't care who they're bugging, whether you're trans or not, you know, get them out of there. But otherwise, what is this about?
It's illegal to bother anybody in the bathroom, regardless of...
Not just in the bathroom, it's
Anywhere.
anywhere. You know, you don't have a right to do that. You shouldn't have a right, and neither should anybody else. So how do you think it's all going as far as the campaign itself is? Sound okay? Polls came out today. There were some polls out today, just as I was coming in. NPR had said that with, so like 70% in favor. There is a difference if you pose the question specifically about the bathrooms.
Correct.
I don't want to say we have any problems here, you know, bathroom issues. But anyway, so.
Well, I've sort of stopped practicing law the last 6 months. I've been doing
nothing but
trans advocacy, which
you.
makes it hard to pay the utility bill, but I'm working on that.
That's all right. You don't need all those lights anyway.
No, that's correct. Or all that
I've run
water.
a few campaigns in my time. I will say that, you know, you never take anything for granted, and you absolutely work up to the very last minute to make sure that everyone is aware of the issue, everyone understands the implications and why this is so important. And most importantly, actually, I think is people need to know how to vote. I think some people that I've talked to think, oh, to preserve the current law, I want to vote no. But in fact, it's the other way. To preserve the current law, you want to vote yes. So to support trans rights, you want to vote yes on question 3. And I think that's one of the most important things to leave people with.
That's it.
Right.
You know, that's really all you need to know.
I mean, the transgender advocates who want to preserve this law, because after all, if I can't ride the T to go downtown, stop at Dunkin' Donuts, and grab a cup of coffee, and go into my office building and practice law because people might be discriminating against me, I can't work as a lawyer. So preservation of this law is important for all of us because it enables transgender people to have access to public accommodations that we need every day to lead our normal, dreary, sometimes, quite often, very boring lives. So one of the things that I've found really positive about this campaign is that it has enabled transgender advocates and transgender individuals here in Massachusetts to feel empowered to speak up and be public about who they are and the fact that they're transgender, because, as you mentioned, fear is driven by the fear of others, people that you don't know. And for so long, transgender advocates have allowed opponents of transgender rights the ability to create the narrative that transgender people are mentally ill, mentally deranged, we're all sexual perverts. And so this stereotype, or in the case of trans women, we're all 6'2" with 9-inch heels, blonde hair, and, you know, overly large inflated breasts. None of that is true. And part of it because we trans people, by and large, certainly those of us who have been successful, have, as I told my partners when I came up to my law firm in 2009, I said, when I come back and start practicing as Sara, I want to just sort of blend into the woodwork so that the fact that I'm trans just will not be an issue. Well, now we're being forced to not just blend into the woodwork anymore, but we've been forced to come out and meet people. Because as Carolyn said, once you get to know us, we're just like everybody else. We have really good skills. We really contribute to society. We're fun people. We like to do things. We have interesting lives that we want to share with the communities in which we live and work. And repeal of this law would make it much more difficult. It will send many trans people back into the closet. And it may well, it will deprive the Commonwealth of Massachusetts of a really, I think, important, valuable piece of this mosaic of diversity and excitement and interest that makes Massachusetts such a wonderful state to live and work in.
For me, I came out in a very public way. I had no choice.
Where were you working at that time?
Right here.
Right here?
Yeah. My principal, Nicole Bottomley, and Brad Jackson, they were wonderful. When I came out, I went to Nicole and I said, "Hey, guess what?" I said, "I don't know what to do," and her response was, "I don't either. Let's talk to Brad." So, both of them were incredibly more than supportive, and I knew that this was going to be in a public way, but I knew that hopefully by me doing it publicly, it might stop some fears, like maybe people never met a transgender person, and I'm around a lot, and maybe help the kids stand up for what's right.
And I think it has. Thank you, Sean. All right, folks. Anybody got any last words they want to throw out besides get out and vote, and let's not throw away rights, take away from anybody?
Yes on 3.
Yes on 3. Yes on 3. Yes on 3.
And I do have a couple last minute comments. And I just want to say, Mary, I just want to thank Sara and Sean for participating today, and just for the courage that you have shown. I think it really is a testament to your personal character, and I think it does go a long way for the young people. To see, that they can be themselves. I can think of no more inspiring message to send to a young person that we are a welcoming community, and it's heartwarming to me, Sean, to hear your story that we here in Holliston, and to both of you actually, that we here in Holliston have been a welcoming community.
Well, this is my coming out to the town of Holliston. I've not, as I tell people, when I meet a new client or a new partner joins my firm, I don't walk up to them and say, "Hi, I'm Sara Schnorr. I'm the trans lawyer in this firm," because it's irrelevant to my daily life and my profession. I would fall over if you did that. And when I moved here from Wellesley, I transitioned publicly when I was living in Wellesley, and I was very active in town government there, so it was a big surprise to a lot of people. But when I moved here, I just moved here as Sara. I have a daughter, and I have a grandson, and I have 2 dogs that fence in the backyard. So I guess now if any of my neighbors who are watching this show, I guess will now know that they for the last 4 years have lived and walked dogs with a transgender woman.
We look like everyone else. We really do.
Yeah, and you sound like everybody else too. So it's just a little braver than some of us. That's it. You definitely have a lot of courage. We've gotten 2 comments. They're both very positive comments. Well, one was brave. I don't know. I'd say that for you guys. And then thank you, this was helpful. And I think that's good news for us, that it's been helpful.
Great.
All right. Okay, folks, just remember, yes on 3. And as I say, don't usually come out pounding the pavement for a specific issue. But yeah, on this one, it's different. Yes on 3. Thanks. See you next time.